Hey everyone, welcome in. Ready for a deep dive. Today we're tackling a company that's practically woven into the fabric of America. General Motors. Buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride.
When you think about GM, you think of, I don't know, like classic cars, the open road, maybe even a little bit of Rust Belt nostalgia.
Yeah. But there's a whole other side to GM, a story full of risk, innovation, and yeah, some pretty spectacular crashes too, not just a fender bender kind of.
And to really get into it, we've got a mountain of stuff to dig through today. Articles, archives, even some hot takes on where GM stands in the world today.
It's like we're piecing together a puzzle, right?
Yeah.
Trying to figure out how a company built on big engines and gas guzzlers is going to make it in an electric world.
That's exactly it. Can they really pull it off? I mean, can a company that's so tied to the internal combustion engine actually become an EV leader?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And to even try to answer it, we've got to go back to the beginning, see where they came from, what worked, what went wrong.
So let's talk about this. The GM Heritage Archive. Have you ever heard of anything like it? 8 million photos, thousands of videos. It's mind-boggling.
It's a treasure trove. Imagine a library dedicated to all things GM, from design sketches to factory footage, even like vehicle build records going back to 1977.
1977, I wasn't even born yet.
Makes you wonder if there are answers in there to some of those big what-ifs in GM's history.
Like, remember the EV1, that little electric car they rolled out in the 90s, leased for a bit, and then poof, took them all back and mostly crushed them? What was that all about?
The EV1. It's
Yeah.
almost mythical in the EV world.
Right. Ahead of its time, maybe. But they killed it off.
A lot of theories about why GM pulled the plug. Some say the tech wasn't ready. Others say they were scared to disrupt their own gas-powered business. Can you imagine the debates behind closed doors?
Yeah, it makes you think, right? Like, are those decisions coming back to haunt them now as they're playing catch-up in the EV market?
Maybe, maybe not. But look, to be fair to GM, they've been around for over a century. They've survived a lot.
I mean, you don't last that long without knowing how to adapt, right? Speaking of adapting, let's talk about the guy who got this whole thing rolling. William Billy Durant.
Now, there was a character, huh? Went from horse-drawn carriages to building a global automotive empire. That's a heck of a leap.
He must have been quite a salesman to convince people to ditch their horses for, well, horseless carriages.
Durant was a true visionary, a born salesman for sure, saw the potential of the automobile when most folks were still skeptical. Plus, he had this uncanny ability to bring people together, to rally them around his vision. That's how he built GM, bringing all those legendary brands together under one roof.
Right. Buick, Cadillac, Oldsmobile, Chevrolet. It's like he was collecting car companies.
It's like he was building his own automotive dream team. But, even visionaries can stumble.
Oh, yeah. The higher they climb, the harder they fall.
Well, in Durant's case, it was his spending habits that did him in. He loved to buy companies, but wasn't always the best at managing the money,
Yeah.
Actually, he got forced out of GM not once, but twice.
Twice.
Yeah, his own ambition kind of got the best of him in the end. A classic tale, right? Brilliant, but maybe a little too reckless. So there you have it, a visionary who built an empire, but couldn't quite control his own drive. A real Shakespearean drama, right there, the early days of the auto industry. It makes you wonder, how do you balance that kind of risk-taking with, keeping the whole ship afloat?
That's a great question, and one we'll have to ponder as we move forward. We'll be right back after a quick break.
Welcome back. Last time we left GM in a pretty precarious position, bailed out, but facing a whole new world.
Yeah, a world where electric vehicles are going from, like, a niche thing to the main event.
Exactly. So the big question is, can a company so steeped in, gas engines and tailpipes really make this leap to electric?
It's a huge shift, no doubt. You almost wonder how much of that old thinking is still kind of hanging around GM. Like, are they truly ready to go all in on EVs? Well, let's rewind a bit back to the EV1. We touched on it earlier. This was their first foray into electric cars back in the 90s.
Right, those futuristic-looking little coupes.
But they leased them out, people seemed to love them, and then boom, they yanked them back and, like, crushed most of them. What was up with that?
Oh, the EV1, it's such a head-scratcher, right?
Yeah.
A lot of folks argue that maybe, just maybe, GM wasn't ready for the EV revolution back then.
Like, the tech wasn't there yet, batteries were clunky, range was limited.
Exactly. Plus, let's be honest, maybe they were a little afraid of, messing with their own success.
Right. They were selling tons of gas guzzlers. Why rock the boat?
I think it's a classic case of, a company getting a glimpse of the future and then kind of freaking out and slamming the door shut.
It makes you wonder, right? Like, do you think sitting here today, they look back and think, man, we really messed up with the EV1?
It's hard to say for sure, but I bet they've learned some valuable lessons from that whole experience.
Yeah.
They've got to be thinking, okay, we can't let that happen again.
So let's talk about what they're doing now to, make up for lost time. Tesla's obviously the big name in EVs, but where does GM fit into all of this?
Well, for starters, they're putting their money where their mouth is, investing heavily in EV tech and battery production. They've even set this really ambitious goal, going fully electric by 2035.
2035, that's what, like just around the corner. But isn't everyone making big EV promises these days? What makes GM different?
One thing they're really hammering on is affordability. They seem to get that to make EVs truly mainstream, they've got to be within reach for the average person.
Makes sense, right? I mean, those fancy luxury EVs are cool and all, but if you want to be a real player, you got to appeal to the masses. So how are they going about making EVs more affordable?
Well, they're attacking the battery problem head on. Batteries are the biggest cost driver in an EV, so they're working to bring those costs down.
So cheaper batteries equal cheaper cars. Got it.
Exactly. Plus, they're investing in charging infrastructure, which is key, right? You got to make sure people aren't constantly worried about running out of juice.
Oh yeah, range anxiety is a real thing. Nobody wants to be stranded with a dead battery, so they're focusing on the practical stuff. But what about the cool factor? How do you convince all the gearheads and truck lovers that EVs can be exciting too?
That's where things get interesting.
Oh.
They're actually taking some of their most iconic gasoline-loving brands and electrifying them.
Yeah, like that electric Hummer they came out with. Who would have thought that a vehicle known for, like, guzzling gas would go silent and electric?
Right, it's like they're flipping the script, saying, hey, EVs can be tough and powerful too.
And it's not just the Hummer. They're also doing electric versions of the Corvette, the Silverado pickup truck.
So they're taking the nostalgia, the muscle car image, and giving it an electric twist. That's smart. But the big question is, are people actually buying these new electric GMs?
It's still early, but the numbers look decent, trending upwards. They're not at Tesla's level yet, not even close, but they're definitely making moves. Yeah, it's a tough market. You've got Tesla with a huge head start, plus all these new EV startups popping up all over the place. GM really has to prove that they're serious this time, that they're not going to just dip their toes in the water and then pull back again.
One way they're trying to do that is with this thing called the Ultium battery platform.
Okay, Ultium. I've heard that word, but to be honest, I'm not really sure what it is. Can you break it down for me?
Sure. Think of it like Lego blocks for EV batteries. It's a modular system that they can use to build all sorts of different battery packs for small cars, big trucks, you name it.
So it's like a one-size-fits-all battery system.
Not exactly one size fits all, but more like, super adaptable. It gives them a lot of flexibility and helps them streamline production and keep costs down.
Gotcha. So it's like a secret weapon in the EV wars.
It could be. It's definitely something that sets them apart from the competition.
So we've got the investments in technology, the electrifying of those classic models, the focus on affordability. It all sounds good on paper, but are they really truly committed to this electric future? Or is it all just a big PR show?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's like they're walking this tightrope. On the one hand, they're saying all the right things, making big moves. But on the other hand, they're still heavily reliant on their gas-guzzling trucks and SUVs to, keep the lights on.
It's a tough balancing act, right? They got to keep the old business humming while building the new one at the same time. It's a risky gamble for sure.
And the risks are getting bigger every day as the whole auto industry goes through this massive upheaval. The shift to EVs is happening faster than anyone thought.
It really makes you wonder, what's the world going to look like in 10, 20 years? Will we all be zipping around in silent electric cars? Will gas stations just vanish?
Those are the questions we're going to tackle in the final part of our deep dive. We'll take a step back and look at the big picture, the forces shaping the EV landscape, the challenges and opportunities ahead, and what it all means for everyday drivers like us.
Sound like a wild ride. Stick around, folks. We'll be back in a flash to wrap things up. And we're back. Okay, so we've gone from the birth of GM with Billy Durant all the way to this, near-death experience with the bailout. But now I want to look ahead. What's the road to an electric future really look like?
It's going to be a bumpy ride, that's for sure. I mean, we're talking about a total transformation of like one of the biggest industries on the planet. It's not just going to happen overnight.
Right. It's not just swapping, gas pumps for charging stations. It's rethinking how we build cars, where we get our energy, how we even use cars in our lives.
Exactly. And it's all happening so fast. You've got governments pushing for EVs, automakers scrambling to keep up, consumers starting to see the benefits. It's a whirlwind.
So it's like a global thing. But what about here in the U.S.? What kind of impact do you think this shift to EVs is going to have on the American economy, jobs and stuff?
Well, it's going to be a mixed bag, for sure. On the one hand, yeah, new jobs, new industries. Think about it. Building charging stations, installing solar panels, developing new battery tech. That's a lot of jobs.
So what about the people who work in like oil and gas or those who run gas stations? I mean, are those jobs just going to disappear?
Some will, yeah.
Uh,
But others will adapt. Maybe gas stations start offering charging too. Or they become something else entirely. It's like, the old makes way for the new.
so it's not all doom and gloom. There's opportunity too.
Definitely. It's about like reimagining what's possible.
And what about the environment? I mean, that's been a big reason for pushing EVs, but it's not as simple as just, no more tailpipe emissions, right?
Right. We got to look at the whole picture. Like,
Yeah.
how do we mine the materials for those batteries? What happens to the batteries when they die? There's still challenges.
So it's not a perfect solution, but it's a step in the right direction, maybe.
I think so, yeah. We're moving towards something more sustainable, but we still have a ways to go.
Yeah.
And the good news is technology keeps getting better, right?
Mhm.
So those batteries are going to get cleaner and greener over time.
You know what I've always found interesting about EVs? It's the driving experience. It's so smooth, so quiet.
Yeah, like gliding almost.
It's definitely different from a gas-powered car. But let's talk about the big thing, the cost. EVs have always been kind of pricey, right? Is that changing at all?
Absolutely. As batteries get cheaper, so do EVs.
Mhm.
And you've got like government incentives, tax credits, all that stuff. Sometimes when you factor in fuel savings, an EV can actually be cheaper to own than a gas car in the long run.
So it's not just good for the planet, it might be good for your wallet too.
Exactly.
But okay, let's be real. Some people just love that, roar of a V8 engine, the smell of gasoline. Are those folks ever going to come around to EVs?
Well, it's tough to change people's minds, especially when it comes to something as like emotionally charged as cars. But I think as EVs get more powerful, more stylish, as that performance gap closes, we'll see more people making the switch.
Yeah.
Especially, I think, younger generations who've grown up with like instant gratification in tech.
So it's not just about individual choices, right? It's about the whole ecosystem changing. More charging stations, better batteries, longer range.
Exactly. As more people adopt EVs, it becomes easier for everyone else to do the same. It's like a snowball effect.
Mm.
And I think that's what's going to make this transition really take off. It'll become the norm.
So the future of driving is electric. No turning back.
I think that's where we're headed.
So what does that mean for a company like GM? They've been building gas guzzlers for 100 years. Can they really become an EV leader now?
That's the big question, isn't it? They've got a lot of catching up to do, a lot to prove. But hey, they've survived a lot, right?
That they have. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? We've looked at GM's past, their present, their future. It's a story that's still being written, but it's definitely a story worth following.
I agree. It's a story that affects all of us, really, as we figure out how to move towards a, more sustainable future. And I think that's what's so fascinating about it, right? It's not just about cars. It's about how we live, how we think about the world.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of General Motors. We hope you learned something new, maybe even changed your mind about a few things. And remember, the next time you see a car, any car, think about the company that made it, the journey it took to get here, and where it might be going next. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and most importantly, keep those wheels turning.